desperately lost. We are the lone and hopeless. We are the outcasts.
A good morning. Welcome to Faith on Hill's online Sunday morning service. We gather together every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m., both online and in person. Now, in person, we are at our building on Hill Road. We gather together. We have kids' church. We gather together for song and worship, prayer, community. We study the Bible together. And then we gather together throughout the week in small groups that meet online and in person as well. You can email smallgroups@faithonhill.com for more information. We have youth group that meets Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. And then online, you can search Faith on Hill Church on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and you can find all of our online content. You can follow us on social media at Faith on Hill, and you can check out our website, faithonhill.com, where we have the live stream for Sunday mornings as well. Joshua chapter 13, starting in verse 1, says that Joshua had grown old. And the Lord said to him, "You are now very old, and there are still large areas of land to be taken over." Now, that's not the way I want to start my day. Adam, you are very old. I mean, there are just certain things you don't want to hear, okay? I mean, that's just a reality. I spend a lot of time around elementary-aged kids, right? Church and helping out in the schools and all these different things. And so I talk to kids all the time. And I kind of enjoy asking, how old do you think I am? And a couple weeks ago, I asked a group of kids, how old do you think I am? And one of them said 32. I liked that answer. And one of them said 65. I liked that answer less. You know, there's all kinds of, they just don't know. You're much older than me. That's all they know. And but nobody likes to hear that, right? There's a realization, right? I watch baseball. I love baseball. Well, there's a realization now that I'm 42 that there's only a handful of players in the league who are my age. I don't know if there's anyone playing in the NFL anymore who's my age. And if it is, there's just maybe one or two. I am too old to make it in Major League Sports. I don't know how old you were, but this was a thing for me. I think there's a thing in every person's life, and especially growing up like I did, where sports was kind of a big thing. And there's this realization I don't think I'm going to play professional sports. And I don't know when that realization came or whatever. It came for different sports at different times. I've always loved baseball, watching baseball, going to baseball games. But for whatever reason, I never played Little League. And I think I was about 8 or 9 years old when I realized, I probably have to play Little League to play baseball for the Mariners. And so probably not going to be a player for the Mariners. But hey, you know what? Maybe I'll play for the Seattle Supersonics or the Seahawks, right? The Seahawks are terrible. They'll take anyone. Back then they were. I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and man, the Seahawks were terrible. And my kids have no idea how bad it was growing up as a sports fan back then. And so, you kind of have this realization. And then, when I was like 5th, 6th, maybe 7th grade a little bit, I was taller than most of the other boys in my school. So I thought, maybe I can get into this basketball thing. I like basketball, and the only good sports team in town, other than University of Washington football, is the Seattle Supersonics. And basketball's cool, and they're going to the championship. Maybe I could play basketball like them. I'm taller than all the other boys in my school. Maybe I'll be a basketball player. But see, here's the thing that happened. I stopped getting taller, and all the other boys in my school kept getting taller. I am the average height for a man in America. That means you might think, you just feel normal, right? No, because half of the people you ever meet are taller than you. Half of the men you ever talk to, you have to look up to. And then the other half are either your height or just slightly shorter. It's not often that you run into somebody significantly shorter. And so most of the time, you don't feel that tall because you're not. And you realize pretty quick, basketball's not going to happen. I'm not that quick. I'm not that coordinated, and I am certainly not tall. Okay, so I'll try football. And I played football, middle school, high school. I loved playing football. I loved being part of a team. I enjoyed playing high school football greatly. But you know what? I did not have the skills to make it to the next level. I played with a couple of guys who went and played in Division III schools and all that, and great for them. They had a great time. For me, I didn't have the skills. And so when my senior year season was over, that was it. Sports were done. There comes a point where you realize, you know what? I'm too old to do this now. And then, every Thanksgiving, I would play in the Turkey Bowl, and my friends organized this Turkey Bowl. It's still happening. My friend Tony organized this Turkey Bowl starting in 1998, and it's been going consistently every year since. And he doesn't play anymore, but he shows up as sort of he's the league commissioner now, right? He's the one, he still helps organize the game, and he shows up as sort of this elder statesman of the game, and guys are still playing in it. That's the same continuous game. But I was one of the first to tap out because I got hurt when I was 28, 29 years old. And I remember thinking, if I blow out my knee, if I tear my ACL playing in a Thanksgiving morning football game, I wasn't working an office job or a desk job. I was working, where I needed to move and be physical. And so I was like, you know what? I don't want to missed work time over a Thanksgiving morning football game. So I was one of the first to tap out. And they were all like, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And I was like, you know what? Just the job I work, I can't play anymore. And then next year, somebody else tapped out. And over the next few years, more guys, until I don't think there is anyone left from the original crew who is still playing. Because there comes a point where you realize it's just that time is over in your life. And all of us have different things, different seasons. This was something we did. This was a huge part of my life. This was a huge thing for this season. But now that season is changing. And that's what's happening to Joshua. God is speaking to him and says, "Joshua, you are very old, and there is still a lot of land to be taken." And the season is changing for him. I think this is a challenge for every person, just in life in general. How do we navigate the new seasons of life? And there is ample and endless books, podcasts, YouTube videos, blogs about how to navigate changing seasons of life. There's shockingly little written about how to do that within the church. I know people who, maybe they got saved in high school, and so they were in youth ministry, and then they got involved in serving in their church, and then they were kind of, I'm 21, and I got saved in the youth ministry, and now I'm going to be a youth leader at camp. And camp was fun, so now I'm just going to stick around, and every, Wednesday night or Saturday or whenever youth group is, I'll be a youth leader. Great. And they do that for a number of years. And then, they get married or they have kids or something changes. There's a major life change for them, and they can't do that anymore. And they're looking around going, well, what do I do now? Because that season is over. And I've talked to a lot of guys my age who, as they navigated that transition, how do I serve God now in this place? I've got kids, I have responsibilities, I have obligations, and it seems like I can't serve God the way I used to, and I knew how to serve God then. I'm not sure how to do it now. And then maybe you knew how to serve God a certain way in a certain season, and then it's kind of like, you know what, I feel like that season is over, and what do I do next? What do I do next? Joshua is told, hey, you're too old to do what is coming. Now, I want to be really careful here, because I believe ageism, that is discrimination based on a person's age, is prevalent in the American church. And you might say, that's right. Those young churches, they won't let older people be a part of things. And that is true, by the way. You can see it, right? It's not hard to go on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, and you see the big, flashy megachurch. And there is no one on stage over the age of 35, 40. except maybe the pastor who's a really young and fit 50, right? But like everybody else is under a certain age. And don't even get me started on like appearances. Like there was that church over near like Hillsboro. I think this was like 5, 6, it had to have been 8 years ago because it was just before we moved here. And they actually basically were honest about what everybody else in their kind of type of church was doing. They basically said, we're not going to let anybody be on stage who's not under a certain weight. And basically, we're only going to put good-looking, athletic people on stage who are young. That was the rule. You had to be good-looking, athletic, and young. That's who we're going to put on stage. If you're going to do announcements, if you're going to be in the band, if you're going to be on the platform, that's who's going to be there, except the pastor who is skinny and, he thinks he's good looking. I guess his wife thinks he's good looking. And he's not young. We'll make an exception for him, right? It's funny how these things go. Ageism is a real thing in the church. It's also a real thing the other way. You might say, what do you mean? Well, there are churches that don't have the big stage and the flashy lights and the big social media presence. And they're all over our country and they're all over our community. And their ageism is against young people. And you might say, what do you mean? We love young people. We want them here. We love the young people in our church. Really? Really? Is there anybody in your leadership team under the age of 50? Or even under the age of 60? Is there anybody who has a significant leadership role who isn't past retirement age? Nothing wrong against retirement age. Don't hear what I'm not saying. But what I'm saying is, if it is all that demographic, then isn't that the same as cutting people off once they reach that demographic? Isn't it the same as saying, you know what, you're too old to be on stage, as saying you're too young to actively lead in the church? Now, obviously, I'm not going to put a 7-year-old in charge of, here, the 7-year-old's going to be in charge of this ministry, right? We understand that there are reasonable expectations and all that stuff. I thought this was interesting. In the book of Numbers, chapter 8, God gives instructions about the Levitical priests. These are the people who were supposed to take care of the tabernacle and then later the temple. These were the people who were supposed to offer the sacrifices and do the priestly work and ministry among the people of Israel. And in Numbers chapter 8, verses 24 through 26, it says, this is the rule that the Levites must follow. They must begin serving in the tabernacle at the age of 25. And they must retire at the age of 50. That's interesting. And you might think, well, isn't that ageism? Isn't that kicking people out? Now think about this. Lifespans change from culture to culture. Even within our own culture, one of the conversations that has been going on, for decades really, about Social Security is the changing lifespan in America. When Social Security was started, Americans did not live as long as they do now. On average, Americans live, like the average American man lives to be 76 years old. I learned that this week because O.J. Simpson died at age 76, and I saw somewhere that he had made it to the American average. That didn't used to be the average, and it wasn't the average when they established Social Security. Average lifespans change even within our lifetime or our modern era. And that's not to speak of like the difference between, 1720s London and, 6,000 years ago in Egypt along the Nile River. There are different places and different cultures and different climates and different levels of hygiene and different levels of population density and all of these things that affect a person's, longevity and expected age. But God said if they are to serve in the temple, they must begin serving at 25. And then they must retire at the age of 50. And then for 25 years, they are expected to offer their service in the temple. And that matters because what God is doing is, first of all, He's not putting unreasonable expectations on certain types of people. For example, if you're 20 years old, and think about this, in an ancient agrarian culture. I don't know how many of you have ever seen Little House on the Prairie. It's sort of seemed to have a streaming revival lately, but it's this show about people farmsteading and homesteading in the American Midwest, and it's kind of about my family because Laura Ingalls married Almanzo Wilder, and Almanzo Wilder is my 8th cousin, twice removed. I don't know what that means. What does the twice removed mean? I have no idea. I've stopped looking it up because I just forget. But I have seen in a family tree where I am distantly related to Almanzo Wilder. And he married Laura Ingalls, and Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote the Little House on the Prairie books, which were, classic children's books. And kids got married young back then. You were 14, 15 years old, you were thinking about getting married. You were 18, 19 years old, you should have already been working your farm, right? This was the sort of thinking back then. Now it's like, can you imagine that? There's no way that you can imagine an 18 or 19-year-old married and running a farm. That's not within our thought process ever. These things sort of change and move and all that. But in their culture and their kind of time frame, what God is saying is, somebody who is starting out, they're getting married, they're establishing a family, they're a young man, so they may be needed for war and to protect the nation in battle. These aren't to be called for this service. They have other things they're supposed to be doing right now. And then at the same time, serving in the temple was physical work. Butchering the bulls and the goats was physical work. The maintenance of the tabernacle and then later the temple was physical work. Carrying the ark from place to place was physical work. Why would you put that burden on the shoulders of somebody who was no longer able to do so? And I think we have all seen people in our lives. Maybe maybe in your 50s or your 40s or your 60s even, and you've seen your parents trying to carry burdens that they shouldn't have to carry anymore. And you say, you shouldn't have to do that anymore. When the bridge collapsed in Baltimore a couple weeks ago, they interviewed a woman working at a gas station convenience store right next to the bridge, and it sort of became a focal point where people stopped and first responders congregated, and people who had almost been on the bridge but they had shut down traffic went and just kind of gathered together, and they interviewed her about what she had seen, and then they said she was an 80-year-old woman. And it broke my heart that an 80-year-old woman was the overnight cashier at a convenience gas station store in Baltimore. That broke my heart. That whatever had happened in her life had forced her to that place in America. It broke my heart. So what God is saying is, we're not going to place undue burdens on people who are just starting out. We're not going to place undue burdens on people who have done their part. And we're also not going to keep people out. At our previous church in California, one of the other pastors, I was the youngest pastor. There were 4 pastors on staff, and I was the youngest pastor. I was, at the time, 32. And I was the youngest pastor by about 30 years. And one of the pastors, I was the youngest pastor by more. And so he was, I think, 74 years old. And we were talking, and he started talking about all the young people in the church. And after about 5 minutes or so, I said, now, do you realize that everyone you've mentioned in the last 5 minutes isn't actually young? That the people you're talking about are at or near retirement age. They're not young people. They're great people. I love them. I'm glad they are part of our church, but they're not young. I said, I'm 32 at the time, right? I was like, I'm 32, and the young people in our church are starting to think I'm not young. Now I'm 42. I definitely am not young, and no young person thinks that I'm young. Sometimes I'll go to meetings with other pastors, and I'm still, this is frightening to me, in this community, I am still one of the youngest pastors in the community That is frightening to me. And I am still called young man by a lot of them. And that is frightening to me, not because I don't respect them and the work that God has given them, but it is frightening to me because we have so few who are stepping up to take that role and that calling in the church in our area. And the burden is increasingly being placed on people who maybe their time has passed. And maybe our hearts should break a little bit. So Joshua is told, your time is done. And I think the main thing for Joshua with his age wasn't about ability, it was just literally about time. Time catches up to all of us. You know, death has a 100% success rate in this world, other than Jesus. And anyway, 100% success rate. And so, you know, everybody dies. Even Jesus died. He just came back 3 days later, right? But everybody dies. And there was still a lot of work to do. And God's saying to Joshua, you just don't have time. The time it will take to do the rest of the work, you don't have that time. So here's what I want you to do. He says in verse 2, the land remains, all the regions of the Philistines and the Gershurites, from the Shion River, east of Egypt, to the territory of Ekron on the north, and all counted as Canaanites, though held by the 5 Philistine rulers in Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gath, and Ekron, the territory of the Avites to the south, on the land of the Canaanites from Arah, of the Sidonians as far as Apec, to the border of the Amorites, the area of Baalos, and all Lebanon to the east, from Baal Gad to Mount Hebron to Lebo Hamath. As for all the inhabitants of the mountain regions from Lebanon to Mishprath Maim, that is, all the Sidonians, I myself will drive them out before the Israelites. Be sure to allocate this land to Israel as an inheritance, as I have instructed you, and divide it as an inheritance among the 9.5 tribes of Manasseh. The 9.5 tribes and the half tribe of Manasseh, So basically what God is saying is there are 2.5 tribes east of the Jordan River. We talked about them at the beginning of the book. They'll have their land divided. And there are 9.5 tribes west of the Jordan River. They'll have their land divided up. People say, well, aren't there 12 tribes of Israel? Yes. But Joseph had his inheritance split in 2, Manasseh and the half tribe of Ephraim. So 2 half tribes. And then Levi, as we see, his tribe doesn't get an inheritance, and we'll see why in a minute. But that's how they kind of count the 12 tribes. There's the 12 sons of Israel, and then in terms of the 12 tribes of Israel, Levi doesn't get an inheritance, and Joseph's sons get his inheritance divided in half, and so then there's 12 tribes that way. What God is saying is, here's the regions that you have left to conquer. And here's the region over here that I am going to take care of. You don't even have to do that work. I'm going to do the work for you. You just take care of dividing up the land once I have done that work. Now, the divisions of the land east of the Jordan. The other half tribe of Manasseh, the Reubenites and the Gadites, had received the inheritance that Moses had given them east of the Jordan, as he, the servant of the Lord, had assigned them. And everybody thinks of this as them conquering or taking the land. But they looked at it as inheriting it, that God took the land. As he says about the Sidonians, I'm going to go drive them out. I'm going to take care of them. And then I am giving it to you as an inheritance from me. It extended from Aror to the rim of the Arnon Gorge, from the town in the middle of the gorge, and included the whole plateau of Medaba, and as far as Dibon, and all the towns of Shion, king of the Amorites, who ruled in Heshbon out of the border of the Amorites. It also included Gilead, the territory of the people of Geshur and Makkah, and all of Mount Hermon and all Bashan as far as Seklath. That is the whole kingdom of Og in Bashan, who had reigned in Ashtaroth and Edrei. He was the last of the Rephathites. Moses had defeated them and taken over their land, but the Israelites did not drive out the people of Geshur and Makkah, so they continue to live among the Israelites to this day. It's not said here implicitly why those 2 towns weren't driven out. We know historically from other parts of the Bible that Geshur and Makkah seem to have been absorbed into Israel, and so it appears that east of the Jordan River, just like the Gibeonites west of the Jordan River, just like Rahab and her family, that they had said, we want to be part of God's people, and they had been brought in. Verse 11, but the tribe of Levi he gave no inheritance, since the food offerings presented to the Lord, the God of Israel, are their inheritance as he had promised them. So when God was setting up the kingdom of Israel, and you can go back into like Deuteronomy and Numbers and Leviticus to find this, but God gave the Levites cities among all of the tribes of Israel, so that wherever you were in Israel, there was to be a Levite city within walking distance. There was to be priests nearby, and you could go to them for prayer, for counsel, for to make a sacrifice and an offering. I don't believe that I'm a priest. I don't believe that pastors are priests. I don't believe that even people that call themselves priests are priests. I believe that it's very clear in the book of Hebrews that all Christians are priests before God because Jesus has made us priests after his ministry. And so all of us have the ability to go directly to God as long as we are saved by Jesus. But I do believe that God has called and equipped elders in the church who do have a ministry, and people who are pastors in the church who have a ministry of caring for the souls of the people of God. And so, that's what we do. And God had these Levites spread out in towns and cities among all of the people of Israel, east and west of the Jordan River. And then we know from the Gospels that John the Baptist, his father, was part of a system, and so they would sort of draw names, and it would be your turn in the rotation to go to the tabernacle or then later the temple, and then it would be your turn if you were between the age of 25 and 50, and you would get your time on the rotation to show up for a few weeks or a few months and do your service, and then you would go back to your city and take care of your business there. That was the plan for the Levites. But since they didn't have land, they couldn't have large herds of animals. Since they didn't have land, they couldn't grow large crops. How were they sustained? Well, they were sustained, and God in the books of Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, God established ways that as people brought offerings to the Lord, some of that was to be set aside for the Levites so that they could live. And God said, I will be your inheritance. I will take care of you. But to the verse 15, and this is what this is what Moses had given to the tribe of Reuben, according to its clan, the territory from Aroer to the rim of the Arnon Gorge, and from the town in the middle of the gorge and the whole plateau past Medeba, from Heshbon and its towns to the plateau to Dibon, to Balmeth Baal, Beth Baal, Manon, Jahaz, Kedemoth, Mephath, Kirathim, Shebam, Zermath Zahar, on the hill in the valley, Beth Peor to the slopes of Pisgah, Beth Jeshemoth, all the towns of the plateau, the entire realm of Sihon, king of the Amorites, who had ruled in Heshbon. Moses had defeated him and the Midianite chiefs, Evi, Rechem, Zur, Hur, and Reba, princes allied with Sihon who lived in that country. In addition to those slain in battle, the Israelites had put to the sword Balaam, son of Beor, who had practiced divination. So the idea was that they weren't just defeating these kings, but they were also driving out the idolatry and the witchcraft and the sorcery that was practiced among them. They were saying, we aren't going to have any part of that. The boundary of the Reubenites was on the bank of the Jordan, and these towns and their villages were the inheritance of the Reubenites according to their clans. And this is what Moses gave to the tribe of Gad and its clans, and it lists all the cities. And this is what Moses had given to the half-tribe of Manasseh, and to its half of the family of the descendants of Manasseh according to its clans, and it lists the territories of the cities there. This is the inheritance Moses had given when he was in the plains of Moab, across the Jordan east of Jericho. But it was to the tribe of Levi that Moses had given no inheritance. The Lord, the God of Israel, is their inheritance as he promised them. So the chapter closes with this idea that God was setting up an orderly division of the land for the people of Israel. And it starts out by saying, Joshua, your time is coming to a close. This is some things you need to take care of before you are done. And then they go through this whole division, but the Levites are left alone because God says, I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to provide. And there are, people who are missionaries. There are pastors. There are people who have specific callings, unique ministries where God says, you know what? You're never going to be rich. And by like rich, I mean you will never even have anything. But I will take care of you. I'll provide for you. You'll have a roof over your head. You'll have food on the table. And by God's grace, I've seen that in my own life. By God's grace, I've seen it in the lives of others I know about where God just provides and we rejoice in it. And we say, you know what? This is the provision of the Lord. And we do what we do. Now, the idea of all of this coming together is to say this. God has called people to different places and ministries and fields and locations. God puts you where you live. God puts you in the family that you're a part of. God puts you in the community that you exist in. God puts you in your school, in your work, in your office, in your gym, in your sports league, in your whatever community you find yourself attached to, God puts you there. And you have the same way he divided these things up. And maybe you find yourself, you say, I don't know if God put me here. And that's possible. Maybe you've gone somewhere where you shouldn't. We'll find, as you go through the Old Testament, you find that there are times where the people of Israel are places where they should not have been. That there are times where the people of Israel leave the places that God gave them and it does not go well. And so maybe this is a reminder to go back to the places that God has placed you. But in general terms, God's put us where he's put us, and he's given us the work that he's given us. And whether you're young or whether you're old, God has given a work for everyone to do. For everyone to do. And I love this. Verse 1, chapter 14, these are the areas the Israelites received as an inheritance in the land of Canaan, which Eleazar the priest, Joshua the son of Nun, and the heads of the tribal clans of Israel allotted to them. Their inheritance was assigned to the 9.5 tribes as the Lord commanded through Moses. And Moses had granted the 2.5 tribes their inheritance east of the Jordan, but not granted to the Levites as an inheritance among the rest, for Joseph's descendants had become 2 tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. The Levites received no share in the land, only towns to live in, with pasture lands for their flocks and herds. So the Israelites divided the land just as the Lord had commanded Moses. And how they did this was by lot, and the reason, and they're basically rolling dice, and you may say, well, that seems like an odd way of dividing the land. But the reason they did that this way, as we understand it from the ancient, the rabbis and everything, is that basically so that there could be no accusations of favoritism. There could be no cronyism, no nepotism. Joshua wasn't handing out choice land to his favorite tribe. Somebody had helped him out here, or somebody had done a favor for him there, or somebody was married to his second son's cousin or whatever, That was all gone. It was totally random. They said it's in God's hands. However this division happens, it's in God's hands. We have nothing to do with it. Now, the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, "You know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land. I brought him back a report according to my convictions, and my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly, so that on that day Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he has kept me alive for 45 years since that time." He said this to Moses. "And while the Israelites moved about in the wilderness, so here I am today, 85 years old, and I am still as strong today as the day that Moses sent me. I am just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me in that day. You yourself heard it that day, that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified, but the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." And Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. And so Hebron has belonged to Caleb ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Hebron used to be called Kiriath Arba, after Arba, who was the greatest man among the Anakites. And the land had rest from war. So I love this, because what is this all about? Joshua was one of 2 spies. The other was Caleb. And there were 12 spies sent out 45 years earlier. And Moses had sent out these 12 spies into the land, and they came back, and 10 of the spies said the people are too big, too strong, too powerful, we cannot take them. And the people's heart melted in fear, and they rebelled against God, and God said, fine, you don't get to enter the promised land, your children will. But 2 of the spies said, hey guys, we can do this. God has given us a good land. God is with us. God will do all that we need. We can trust in him. And those 2, Joshua and Caleb, were granted the right to enter the promised land, and Caleb had been granted a specific inheritance, the land that he himself had spied out, that he said, I want that country. And so he had been granted that by Moses. And now, for 5 years, Caleb has been in the promised land, fighting in the battles. They're part of things. And as things are being divided out, he goes to Joshua and he says, hey, you were there. You were there when Moses made that promise. There's only a few of us left, but you were there, Joshua. And I'm still young and vigorous. Now, he's not. He's 85 years old. And if you're 85 years old, God bless you, but you know that you're not young. You may still be vigorous. I know some people who are, they're 75, 80, 85 years old, and it's like, man, I wish I had their energy. So I don't doubt the vigor part of what Caleb is saying, but he's not young. But he is saying, hey, I am here to take this hill. I am here to take what was promised. I want the blessing to do that. This is an interesting thing. I said a minute ago, it was talking about ageism in the church. I will say this. One of the things that makes ageism really hard is when an older woman or man of God is wanting to take new ground. Because let's be honest, there was this guy, McLaren, he's a Bible commentator, and who wasn't terribly young when he said this. He says, it's interesting that Caleb wanted to take new ground because most often we who are older want to look back on past victories. Young people will follow older people who want to blaze new trails. Young people will be interested in older people who want to try new things. There is a reason why Conan O'Brien is almost 60 years old and is still relevant. There is a reason why Anthony Bourdain was not young and he was still relevant. I'm not saying, oh, these are people that we should be like, because obviously they're not people that follow Jesus. What I'm saying is, here are 2 examples of people who are getting older who are still blazing new trails. I want to be around older people who are still blazing new trails. I love hearing about what God is doing among people of all age groups and walks of life and different experiences. And I can't stand it when somebody's, well, what's God doing? Well, this happened. Well, that was 20 years ago. What's God doing now? What's happening now? What doors are you walking through today? What new ground are you breaking tomorrow? What's going on? And I love being around people who have an eye forward. And I believe that we have that in our church. Older people who have an eye forward, who are praying, who are seeking God for the next thing. And younger people, I 100% believe that there are more churches that are discriminatory towards young people than there are churches that discriminate towards old people. I just believe that numerically. I think the churches that are discriminatory towards old people are bigger or have a bigger megaphone, and so people pay more attention to them. But I think in terms of sheer numbers, I think it is more so that churches are discriminatory towards younger people. But I'll say this. It is hard for people to ignore younger people when they stand firm in their conviction, because when Caleb and Joshua were younger men, they stood firm in their conviction when everyone else said, we can't do this. They said, we can, because God is leading us to do this thing. They stood firm in their conviction, and there they are now, decades later, seeing the fruit and the benefit and the results of standing firm in their conviction to God. How is ageism destroyed in the church? It's destroyed, first of all, by those of us who are here making a conscious choice that we're going to see each other as equals. And you know what? Faith on Hill is a multi-generational church. We have people of all ages, and I am so thankful for that. So I don't think that ageism is a problem that we are seeing, but it could be a problem if we don't guard against it. It could be, and so we have to watch for it. But then on the flip side, you're older, take new ground. You're younger, stand firm in convictions about Jesus, because those things are hard to fight against. Ageism in the church goes away when there's a young person that is so passionate about Jesus they cannot be ignored. Ageism in the church goes away when there is an older saint who says, you know what, I am just here to do the work of God and not to be nostalgic about the past or not to try to uphold something that I like in favor or in preference over something that could be happening today. But I want to take new ground and conquer new mountains and all of that. It's a two-way street. Ageism in the church is destroyed when we who are here say, we will not accept that. We will look and see everyone as our brother and our sister, and we will see the youngest in our church as equally valuable as the oldest in our church, and we will see the oldest in our church as equally valuable as a young family or whatever. Ageism in the church is destroyed when people on the old and the young say, you know what, I'm just going to walk firmly with Jesus. I love this story. I love Caleb here because he's still going forward. I don't know what I'll be like if I even get close to his age, but I hope I am somebody who is still taking new ground and saying, what is it that God wants me to do next? God bless you. We'll see you next Sunday morning as we gather together and continue to study God's Word together. If you have any questions, you can email me, adam@faithonhill.com, and we'll see you this week in the small groups and next Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m.
I was too young to know you were a rich man. I just knew you loved me.